Start the broadcast. So it's taking a moment. Still starting.
We're ready?
All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Bates from the Greater Hamilton Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for joining us today with our new broadcast. We have a live audience here, as well as many of you tuning in from your laptops and other devices out beyond our building. So thanks for joining us. Today, we're very excited. We're going to be discussing the book Tribal Leadership. Our facilitator today, backed by popular demand, is Byron Skaggs with InfinitePing. And Byron is an international consultant and master in transforming leaders, organizations, and culture. Our special guest to discuss the book today is Jon Graft, Superintendent of Butler Tech Career Schools, who certainly has developed a reputation for out-of-the-box thinking, ideas, and models. So with that, I'm turning it over, Byron, to you.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate the chance to connect with you, and hopefully we'll be able to keep a good signal while I'm overseas. John, thanks for being a part of this as well. It's great to have, especially somebody who is thinking about this from an educator's perspective, but then also from an operational and business perspective. So excited to be able to have this conversation together today. So a couple things just for, well, a few things for housekeeping, I guess we could say real quick. If you're online, we would love to hear you and have your participation as well. There's a way to be able for you to submit your questions, and we have staff there that are here with us that will be fielding those questions, and then we'll be asking those so we can all hear them. And for those of you that are in the room, I will not be able to see you, but I'll trust that Dan or John can kind of alert us when we have somebody in the room who's got a question. Just feel free to raise your hand, or if there's even an opportunity, well, I'll let Dan and John kind of mediate and help moderate from that end, if that's all right. And so the other thing, I just want to say thank you to Laura and Samantha for helping to facilitate and keep this production going as we get to stand and have this conversation. So let's just kind of dig in with the book. It's Tribal Leadership, and wow, where to begin? Why don't we just start by, actually, before we get into the book, and I'm sorry, I should have done this for a second, but John, why don't you take a minute and just kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Butler Tech, and what are some of the exciting initiatives and things that you have going on for this next year?
Happy to do so. Again, my name is Jon Graft. I'm the CEO, Superintendent of Butler Tech. We are a public school district serving students between grades 7 through 12 grade, so junior high all the way to seniors. We also have an adult education component with 5 campuses, approximately 320 staff members, and serving almost 17,000 secondary students a day, and serving close to 2,000 adult education students from a variety of different career tech opportunities, whether it's in the healthcare field, industrial manufacturing, construction, welding, to IT pathways, and a variety of really all different aspects of vocations that are trying to meet the needs of the emerging workforce that we're seeing in our community. We've been in this transformation from a public education standpoint. I know the last time we talked that public education hasn't changed basically in the past 124 years in the United States, and we have charged ourselves with redefining the one-size-fits-all mentality of what public education used to be, and we've defined it as the education revolution. That we are the practitioners at creating some prototypes and doing the work on the ground about how we're going to transform the education system to meet the needs of the workforce.
That's great, thank you. And it's exciting to hear just the idea of prototyping, and that it's not just change for the sake of change, but it's truly a process by which you're looking at something and seeing it as a progression. Even in that process of recognizing, hey, we may not make it just the way we want it this time, but we learn in the process and we create a prototype 2.0 or 3.0 and continue to work toward that growth. I love that idea, and that's fantastic for a school to be thinking in that context. So when we talk about tribes and this tribal leadership, we're really talking about culture, and it's the book is based on a massive amount of research that took over 10 years, and I think they had 24,000 participants. So they really were able to try to identify and a structure by which they could understand 5 different levels of culture. And so I wanted to kind of just throw a couple things out and just share these things, and then for us to begin to have that conversation of what does it mean to try to identify where our employees and the people are within our companies and our organizations, and then how do we help to move them to what this book anyway talks about as kind of the ideal or a high performing team or a tribe, and then what does it look like for sustainability and things going forward. So some of this is just kind of digging into a little bit of the conversation, getting some common words and vernacular around what we do for the next few minutes. So let's kind of jump into the PowerPoint piece of this, and we'll try to move along with these pretty quickly. So let me pop over and share these here. So the promise of tribal leadership is this idea that as you move into, these are the benefits. The idea of having tribal leadership is you gain unparalleled loyalty. You have a high performing team. You increase the profitability of your company. There's the high potential for scalable growth. And ultimately, you have happy employees, you have happy teams, and the overall culture and the environment is one that's very, very positive. So those are the benefits, and I mean that's kind of at a very high level. But as I mentioned before, the study took over 10 years, and they used research from over 24,000 people. And what made this unique was the research was actually driven by language. And so their conversations came as a result of hearing how people talked and identifying certain pieces of the language that really was driving these conversations and driving how people were brought together. Excuse me. So the question of what is a tribe, so this idea that birds flock, fish school together, and people will tribe together. There's a sense that there are natural tribes within organizations, within schools, within communities, and so these 5 stages of culture are really stages that build on each other. Your organization, your company's culture is driven by the stage of the members within your organization. So it's not like you can just create and say, oh, we are going to be a high-performing culture without literally taking into consideration the stage in which you have for the members of your organization, the tribe that you have. So the goal is really to identify first where your tribe members are in the different stages of culture, and then begin to look at ways in which you can help move everybody together toward a higher culture that operates efficiently and effectively together. So it's very possible that you will have members of your organization at different stages. You're probably going, what are those stages? Well, I think I have the answers here, maybe. But the idea here is for us to understand the big picture and really to help our tribe members move through these stages to a higher level at which everybody then can perform more effectively. And I've just blown through a whole bunch of things real quick, and I'm just curious. Questions or comments before we kind of dig into the 5 stages? I realize I just kind of blew through that, but John, I wanted to just, what aspects of this can you speak to that from your work with Butler Tech, how do you see the tribe pieces coming together, especially for an organization that has as many staff and employees as you have? Do you see that everybody is one tribe, or do you have different tribes, and how do you go about identifying what those tribes look like or who they are?
Well, I would say that due to the number of people that we interact with on a daily basis and our staff members, we have a variety of different tribes that are within the organization. I would say that it's absolutely true that like tribe members tend to gravitate toward one another. And so if you have behaviors that life is great, that typically perpetuates people who feel that life is great as well, and that the work is valuable and that the work is meaningful, and you attract more people to that particular portion of your tribe. And I think that the same goes true for the initial stage or sometimes the negative stages that, life's terrible and I have no control of it and everything that's happening in my life is terrible. There are tribes that sort of create and foster that behavior. And I think from a leadership standpoint, I know that the book mentions about having that epiphany and that moment in which you say, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why? What's the purpose of our work? And I know the book talks a lot about, defining purpose for why you're together. And 3 years ago when I arrived at Butler Tech, the single question or the exploration of what I wanted all of our employees to do was find your why. Why is it you're doing what you're doing, and why do you find value to it? And I think what it did is it opened up a lot of conversation about people that were in those first stages about why they felt things were terrible and why they had no control of it. And also for those that are, in the stages that life is great and we're in this together and that we're solving these problems together and nobody cares about who obtains the credit for it, in fostering those conversations. And then how you interact with those groups and how you penetrate those groups to offer some probing questions, I think is, for me, what the validation was. But I had that moment, that epiphany in my career before I arrived at Butler Tech, that I was going to do work that was meaningful, that was purposeful, and led to a higher calling than just profits, enrollment, applications, and really production of good quality students in a workforce. It needed to be more than that. And I think that's the beginning of developing your culture in your organization, is having people explore what makes them tick and help them find their why. And if they've lost it, it's generally reverts back to some of those earlier stages about where they are in their tribes.
Yes, thank you. That reminds me of the conversation we had in February, where we used Simon Sinek's book on Start With Why, and really dug into that whole concept of it's not about what you do, it's why you do it. And a lot of times the struggles that a company or even people within a company, the struggles that they will have many times will come down to a confusion or lack of clarity over the values and what is really driving the organization and why they exist. So absolutely, finding the why from a personal level and from a corporate level or a business level is extremely helpful. Dan, any comments? You kind of shifted there. I'm wondering if you've got what's cycling through your head.
And what I liked about the book is that I think the first step is very tangible when he talks about language, and that it is all based around the language that you use. And I like the concepts of the book, and I think John did a great job kind of, summarizing the whole book, really. But so session's over. But when you really talk about where do I start, there's a lot of times you read these, really good books as from a philosophy standpoint, and you're like, okay, now what do I do with this? And what I liked about this book is, tangibly to me, I can say, well, language is something I can change. I can make that shift tomorrow, and I can take that I and me out of the conversation. And I think that even here with my tribe, we do that, but we do that much better. And I think that just starting with it's us, it's a tribe. It's not any one of us, because no one of us can make everything happen. It takes the whole tribe. And the other thing that in that same language, there were some epiphanies for me in the book with language. When we're talking about, who's your competition and that type of thing. I think it's very interesting because even when you try to make it about the tribe and you try to be positive, you still think about, your competition being someone who might be doing something similar to what you're doing, as opposed to, thinking completely out of the box, and I know like the one example was the company that, who's your competition? Well, it's cancer, when they were expecting it to be, another pharmaceutical company or something. So I think coming back down to, what you had mentioned, John, about, when you know what your why is and you know why you're doing what you're doing, it makes it much easier to say, okay, so what's our real agenda here, and how do we tie that all together? So that's, kind of what it meant for me, kind of tying that into, what you had already said. So.
Yeah, I would add an example. At Butler Tech, one of our norms is openly speaking your truth. And I know that many organizations have norms and they have values listed, but we started every meeting back in 2016. We started every meeting with talking about what our norms were. And the fact that we mentioned openly speaking your truth, even when initially people were not openly speaking their truth, they would begin to take some risks by using the words, well, let me openly speak my truth. And that was a signal to everybody that they were going to say something that they maybe had on their mind for years in the organization prior to my arrival or even since my arrival. But it gave them some permission to share maybe some frustrations with why they were at a particular stage in their tribe within the organization, and why they felt that they had lost some of that purpose and passion for what it is that they thought was going to be their vocation. And I've said, a long time to staff members that you need to find something that you love to do. Because if you don't, you're going to do this work for the next 37 to 40 years to 45 years. That's a sentence if it's not something that you really feel connected to, or that you don't feel connected to the organization about what their purpose is. Culture absolutely trumps strategy. I love that statement. It absolutely does. Too many times organizations are focused on the strategy and the outcome, and it seems very, very sterile in the sharing of that success for your organization if you're really not as focused on the culture of your organization.
Yeah, excuse me, that's great. I mean, that idea of that openly speaking your truth is something that is truly, I mean, the way you describe that and define that is, we know it's clear from the way you describe it. It's not just marketing shtick that's out there to say, oh, well, these are our core values and we've put it on our website. So, but you're actually saying this is who we are. And if we're going to be true to this, we need to be able to honor that when somebody even utters those words and it becomes that trigger. Everybody knows there's a common phrase that people can work with. And that's a great way to help even just de-escalate, in moments of tension, to be able to say, okay, we've kind of set the groundwork here. There's a foundation by which we're all functioning, and let's have this conversation together. That's a fantastic piece, and I love to hear that that's something that you've incorporated into your work, and so I mean, because it pays off dividends, huge dividends down the road. So thank that. I feel like we've kind of jumped several slides and stages here, but I do want to make sure that everybody understands when we talk about stages, because we've mentioned stages several times, what we're actually talking about for these 5 stages of culture. And so we'll explore these real quick. And so this is kind of a culture map, these 5 stages of culture, and everybody can be identified somewhere in this area, in these areas of culture. And the idea is to try to help people grow in their progression up to the ideal stage would be a 4 or a 5. But many times there are a lot of businesses that are kind of in that 3rd stage. But the 1st stage is really a minimal amount of the people, but the areas there in the red are the low performing businesses from the research that they've done, and the high performing businesses were the ones that were in stages 4 and 5. Stage 1 is a culture. Thankfully, there's really a small amount of people that are a part of that area, but it really is that this whole concept that life is just awful. Life sucks, it's terrible, and it's everything. Thankfully, from their research, and I think this plays out in most of our environments, that's usually about 2% of the employee base. Stage 2 culture is my life sucks. So it's not just all of life. Now it's more personalized. It's just my life sucks and it's awful, and there's and so there's a lot of focus on me and how awful things are, and from work, from home, from any variety of places. The stage 3 culture is this notion of I'm great and you're not. So it's a very, very, people in stage 3 can get work done. They can be very, very productive, but they're very productive to a point, because this is where the knowledge hoarding takes place. It's about what I know that will move me forward in my business or my job or my career aspirations, but my job is to step on you in the process. So that's a stage 3 culture where you've progressed to a point, but it's still about me. We transition to stage 4, where it's about us. It's about the things that we can do together, recognizing that it's we and us. That language piece, Dan, you mentioned the shift in language. Paying attention to the language that takes place in your workplace is critical. Are we talking as a team? Are we winning? What are we doing that is helpful, that is successful? Or is it about me winning? Is it about me? It's I and me versus us and we. And the stage 4 culture is moving in that direction. And the stage 5, forgive the really blatant American photo here, but this is quite literally one of the iconic shots of the U.S. hockey team back in the Olympics in the early 80s. This was a pinnacle moment where a crowd of teammates came together and accomplished something that nobody thought was possible. And that stage 5 culture can actually be experienced in business as well. So one of the pieces that they talk about in the book is moving from this undermining, this apathetic victim, the lone warrior, the tribal pride, the innocent wonderment. It's this whole movement, and the language aspect is what I want to look at real quick, is this notion of, goes from life sucks and my life sucks to I'm great, to changing to the communal sense of we're great, and then that 5th stage is life is great. So what's interesting, if you take a look at the left side there, the percentages, real high percentage in 2 and 3, and a large percentage in 4. The goal is to be able to help move people toward that direction of growing to 4. The authors actually talk about stage 5 as being something that people will kind of bump into or grow up to, but then they will quite frequently basically rest in stage 4. So the goal is to try to get to stage 4 and move as a team, as a unit in stage 4. So one of the questions, the shift that takes place is this change in stage 4, and it really comes down to a couple different things. There's networking, there's core values, and we'll look at these. But the networking piece, I'm curious, and this is what I'd like to ask John. When you arrived at Butler Tech and the transitions and the changes that you've seen over time, can you speak to how what has happened with the networking aspect of the way that people have transitioned or changed? Because the idea is that the bottom photo where there's the red X through there, that's kind of a description of a stage 3, where the one person is hoarding all the knowledge, and everybody has to go to that one person. It's kind of they are the holder of the keys. They are the keeper of the knowledge. And what does it take to go from that kind of relationship to a triad relationship, the relationship that's at the top of the screen here, where there's a sense of interchange? People can work around and talk around with each other. So I'm curious, John, just if can you speak to this from what does it look like on the ground for this kind of environment to work in your setting?
Yeah, so we use the norm openly speaking your truth, and that becomes very evident within the organization itself when the superintendent or the CEO doesn't run all of the meetings, and when you're asking as the leader for your peers to give you feedback in front of other colleagues about how I'm either running a meeting or how somebody else is running a meeting, or how my leadership skills are being fostered or where I'm lacking. And so I would say that the evidence and the proof in talking about the changing of the language, at the beginning of this journey, it wasn't about I'm great and you're not, because we knew that this collective wisdom that we all had in wanting to do something bigger than Butler Tech was what united us. And frankly, not caring about who obtains the credit, I think is an important behavior from a leadership standpoint to practice, not just having philosophy, but the staff members that we attract now are interested not necessarily in their own individual success, but they want to be a part of a team and be a part of a team that is doing something bigger. And frankly, the example you gave about the the hockey championship, that nobody else believes that they can do it, is sort of what unites, I think, that group to want to connect with one another, to get from that 4th stage to the 5th stage about doing something bigger than you. So I believe that the language aspect of not caring about who obtains credit, and then I would say also from a leadership standpoint, and no matter who is offering suggestion in the organization, we've used the term, you need to have a cultural informant. Somebody that is telling you at all times how your behaviors are helping the organization or how your behaviors are hurting the organization. There's a lot of times there are blind spots that people don't know what stage they're in. And as organizations, sometimes they don't know what stage they're in until they have a sense of safety where they can openly speak their truth and they can begin to share and unpack some of the behaviors that they've displayed over time, and they believe it because they trust that the organization is doing it for all the right reasons. I would say, just to jump a little bit, I know you and I talked about this last week a little bit, that sometimes there is this notion that when you come in as an organization that you don't do anything for 6 to 12 months and you don't make any changes. And I think sometimes that's a mistake in doing so, because you are sharing, by not dealing with some of those behaviors that are in those early stages, that those are sometimes acceptable behaviors, and those are harder to overcome if you don't address them immediately. And but the networking aspect of connecting with one another, I think what we've seen, whether we're at Butler Tech in stage 4 or stage 5, I think that's still a work in progress as always. But I think what we're doing now is attracting people that are finding that synergy and wanting to foster, why they were in 1 and 2 and why they want to be a part of the 4 and the 5s.
Byron, if I could just add something.
You've touched on a couple of different things, and I want to.
Sorry, if I could just add something.
Go ahead.
I think what's significant about not just this conversation, but what John's talking about, the transformation that's happening at Butler Tech, is, what was really evident to me in the book, and it's evident in kind of life, is you are taught to be really proficient at stage 3. Through school, through business practices, through, successful business models. You are taught that the better you become at stage 3, the better business you're going to be, and the better, manager of people you're going to be. So, the things that we're hearing today with some of the corporations that have stepped out of the box and doing incredible things, large corporations, people are thinking, well, I can't do that because, I'm just, a little guy. So I think that realization that, like everything you've been taught, you have to kind of step out of that. Because, to become a stage 4, tribe or organization or whatever, you have to really say, okay, this is how I've operated all my life potentially, and I've been really good at it, maybe, but it's not going to produce any longer the kind of tribe and organization that I'm trying, to become. And so, as a leader, I mean, it's very risky, and it's, you're really stepping potentially into unknown territory, because I would just kind of throw this to John. I mean, when you come on board and you're starting to do things that have never been done before, you have to be willing to accept the risk of how that it might not go the way you predicted. So, I'm going to ask that question to John. If there, how have you managed that? How have you observed that? I mean, sometimes the way you predicted it ends up better than you thought, and sometimes it doesn't. So, if that's okay, Byron, if I could just kind of challenge John on, how has that been part of the process?
Well, again, I love the fact that the book talks about having that epiphany, and so I entered into Butler Tech had already experienced sort of that epiphany that what I was going to seek an organization that was looking for that type of transformation.
Right.
And so, you know, I would be remiss in saying that our board has been very supportive in allowing us to create some of those conditions that allow you, and we talk about failing forward. And I know we mentioned about prototypes, but that's purposeful that we use that language, because too often in education, it's been this assembly line, and breaking that structure down, as you've said, have long institutional legacies for why they do it that way. But I think from the customer standpoint, we've gone in education from a blackboard to a whiteboard to a smart board, but kids are still bored. And for me, you go into education not to bore students. You go in to pour into them and ignite a passion and a purpose. And that epiphany for me was what I was going to pour my work into was an organization that wanted to do that work as well. And so being able to have those aspects where you have a board that allows you to do some of those things, and then accept the fact that there are going to be some failures. But a failure is a prototype. It is failing forward. This is our first iteration. This will be our second iteration. And what we learn from those lessons is really kind of the transformation for us from a cultural perspective, that you don't have to seek all the credit and everything, because when something does succeed, we're all going to celebrate its success. And when something fails, if Dan, you were one of our employees, we're not going to leave Dan out there in the lurch to say, well, it was Dan's idea. It sort of becomes the difference between the discussion and dialogue. When you get to the discussion, there's a winner and a loser to what decisions made, and a winner and a loser to the conversation. And for us, it's about the dialogue. What can we generate as far as an idea is concerned, and prototype something so that we all celebrate when it succeeds, and we all gather around and help each other to fail forward when we need a 2.0 version of our prototype.
I could sit back and hear you talk about this all afternoon. I mean, this is really the fun part of it. So one question that's kind of coming to mind is, you've mentioned, John, that you've got a very supportive board, and that in and of itself is another tribe. That's a part of your your working environment. So from that, I'm curious, because there may be people who are here listening or participating that may not necessarily have that kind of supportive board or stakeholders in the organization. It may even be team members within their own leadership. Can you speak to what does it mean to try to help shift even the leadership of your organization or your board or people that you have that are those significant stakeholders? What does it mean to try to help move them to a point where you can then fail forward and not feel like your head is on a block?
Well, I would say first, you need to be willing to be the risk taker. If you're the leader of the organization, you have to be the one that establishes that this is what the culture is going to be, and this is what we're going to accept, and this is what we're not going to accept. And then I think when you get your first follower, that begins your triad of your tribe, you really foster that relationship. So if Dan and I were both a part of Butler Tech, and Dan was in a meeting with me and he openly spoke his truth to me about something that I was doing in the organization that he felt was harmful, I would be showing the rest of the organization and who's witnessing this that I'm supporting his efforts in openly speaking your truth, because that's what we culturally believe our norms are. And I'm going to support his efforts when he does that. So he's going to collaboratively give me feedback about that information. So I think you have to be willing as a leader to take those risks yourself. You also have to be willing to give up that control when the tribes start to blossom, and allow them their own development of the tribes. But you've got to continue to reiterate that the language is about we as a group and for the greater good. What's in our organization, we always ask the questions, what is best for students? Because what we're building and designing ultimately is not about what's best for the superintendent, what's best for the board, what's best for the teachers or the educators. It's what's best for students. And staying focused on the greater good provides you some opportunity to break down some of those walls that are created with organizations that feel like you have to take credit for what's good and you have to abandon some of those things, or not distance yourself from some of the things that are not successful. That's what great companies do in their research and development, is continue to prototype those things that really foster outcomes that go beyond what your own imagination could have ever thought when you originated the idea.
Thank you. And just when you're talking about that notion of who gets the credit. I mean, you mentioned earlier, and I wrote these things down, you talked about who gets the credit, or that question of that, and when you begin to think of it from an organizational perspective. And then you talked about safety and the importance of trust in all of that process. And so I wrote those things down. I was actually going to come back around and ask you to kind of flesh that out a bit, but you just did that. What I love is just that example of sitting in a meeting and having somebody who's willing to speak that truth. Really is that opportunity to foster trust, that you're not going to somehow either fire them or discipline them or hurt them in the process because they've been encouraged to speak up and identify something that they think is really a place where you could improve. And have that kind of conversation is incredibly meaningful and helpful. So what's interesting when we talk, up to this kind of talk, how we always kind of the goal is to progress from 2 to 3, from 3 to 4, from 4 to 5. It's important for us to note that it is very easy for people to slide from 4 to 3 or 3 to 2. And this is a totally dynamic environment, that the need to be intentional and mindful about how you foster the language, foster this culture, is something that is not just okay, we're here and you sit down. It is an ongoing dynamic process. Life experiences or a variety of other things will speak to that, and sometimes hurt or help the whole process. And so it's important to just remember that people can kind of slide up or slide down in the culture, and the organization culture may do the same. So when you've talked about this idea, and even just that epiphany, that moment when the organization realizes something has to change. You've talked about how Butler Tech was already at that point when you arrived. And Dan, I want to hear from both of you. Has there been a time in your career, maybe not in your present location, where you were at an organization when that epiphany occurred, and what what transpired? Was there an actual process by which, and you may not have been in leadership, but I would love to just hear your thoughts on this. If that came to a point where the organization had that kind of epiphany, what did they do to move forward? Were there specific pieces that you go, oh yeah, that was a really good move, or no, that's something we can learn from? I'm curious to your thoughts on that. What?
I would say in my current situation, I'm very fortunate because I'm in a similar position where John is that, I have a very supportive board. And, one of the things that attracted me to my current position is not only what's happening in the city, but the where the board was, when I interviewed to come here. And when somebody's talking about, we are bringing you here to create change, that's exciting. I don't know if they really knew what they were getting when they opened that door, but and I'm going to go back to your question because I've been in the opposite situation where I was in a previous position years ago where I had the epiphany and nobody else did, and it is really frustrating when I was younger then, less experienced. I probably would have now maybe I'd handle that differently. But it is really challenging when you get the epiphany and where the organization needs to be, where the organization kind of needs to go to start that journey. You may not know where that journey's going to end, but it has to start that journey. And everyone else is stuck in, the safety net of where it's always been. And, so I'm not exactly answering your question because I spent the next 4.5 years trying to transform a staff and a board into an organization that I knew would be much better than where they were. So what happened was I became the rogue and got one person on my tribe, and we kind of did it anyway. So which transformed the organization. Unfortunately, when I left, so did that other person, and the organization went back exactly and slid back into, a 2 or a 3. So, that, I guess I would say, I was not successful at that because the organization did not continue. So that's when you don't get the whole tribe on board and you kind of move forward anyway and kind of do your own thing. So that may not be what you were looking for. It was not a success. It was an epiphany that I had, but I could not get everyone else, on board with that. And, what ended up happening in that situation, I ended up leaving because, you have to also, make a choice. Do I go back and slide back and be stuck with them? Or do I find a new gig? So, I'm not sure that's answering your question or not, but it's, I think a lot of times you get an epiphany of how, especially if you're the person in charge, hopefully you get those epiphanies of, what journey do we need to start? And I'm very comfortable with not knowing what the end result is. I'm very comfortable with that. When I came here, I said, we're starting a journey, we're pushing off the dock, and I have no idea where we're going to dock in the end, but to me, the excitement is the journey, and that's the learning experience. And that's when, you are bringing in information from the whole team and all sources to say, that, where do we go? And you're really just, I think, as a leader steering that process, encouraging that, to it's okay to not know exactly what the end result's going to be. So I just want to say, I think we do have some questions out there, Laura.
Yes.
So if you want to, we can just stop for a minute, Byron, and ask some questions.
Sure.
We have one question. I don't know if we have any questions in the room at this point. Let's start within the room first. We have questions in the room. Yes, Ashley.
Yeah, I would ask how this applies to those of us who run our own business or who are independent, who have very, that our network, when we think about this, is more within the chamber, within the city, within other professionals that we work with.
As far as the whole philosophy behind the book?
Yeah.
I think John mentioned it, and when you talk about forming triads, one of the examples in the book, and I don't know if you've had a chance to read the book yet or not, but there was one example of, somebody who was a hugely successful, real estate developer, and And when they told the story, it was talking about what she really didn't do that much as far as that was visible. But when you watched her operate, she was always connecting people. She learned about everybody she was working with, and this would, I think, apply to what your question is. Really knowing enough about your clients and all the people you network to know, first of all, what their core values are, and what they could do together if they were brought together. So, I thought that was pretty cool from a chamber perspective. Hopefully, that's something we pride ourselves that we hope we're doing every day, is really identifying people that when we see two people together, bringing them together and saying, you two need to talk. I tell people a lot of times, if I introduce you to somebody, there's a reason. It may not be evident at the beginning, but you'll figure out what that is later. And that could be the context they have, the experiences they have, or whatever. So, if you did get a chance to read the book, I think that's a really great point where she was a master, I hate to use the term manipulator because that's kind of negative, but she was a master manipulator of knowing who should meet whom. And that's how she built her whole success.
Yeah, I would concur with Dan and add to it that yes, from a tribal leadership standpoint, we're working internally at Butler Tech, but I would include Dan and the Hamilton Chamber as part of our tribe because we have a like mindset about what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. And so I would say from an individual standpoint, you may be expending an abundant amount of time trying to convince someone who may not have, maybe at a very different stage in their life about what kind of tribe they have affiliated themselves with. And at those points in time, you as an individual business owner need to make those conscious decisions. Who are the ones that are going to help me move the ball forward at solving whatever issue you're trying to solve within your business. So, the reason I think the Hamilton Chamber and Butler Tech are such great partners is because we have some commonality in the way in which our tribal leadership within our organizations are working with one another.
And I appreciate you saying that, and then, I think that opens the door for us to even be more legitimate with each other, and more real, because, I'm comfortable with throwing an idea off of John, knowing I don't know if it's going to work or not, and I'm okay. I don't feel like I have to say this is why you should do this. I'm okay with saying I have this idea. I don't know if it's for you or not. I think it is. I'm not even sure it's going to work, but let's talk about it. It changes the relationship.
And we will take the meetings, not knowing what the outcome is. But what I tell our staff is let's take the meetings because Dan he's got a growth mindset when it comes to what it is we're trying to accomplish and why we're trying to accomplish it. So I would say that your tribal leadership is within your organization as well as it extends beyond. It goes to all stakeholders.
Then we have another question that's from our viewers out in the field. We have two questions now. So who wants to give us those questions? Laura?
All right. Yeah, I will. So are there any drawbacks to being a stage 5 organization? Is innocent wonderment ever vulnerable to overlooking potential dangers to the organization?
Do you want me to answer that, or do you want to answer that?
Okay, go and take it.
Yes, there are dangers with it. I think what you discover is that there is such a drive for people who are desiring that stage that you end up attracting a lot of people in your network that want you to try new things and continue to foster that. And you have to be able to deal with some of the capacity issues that you will end up dealing with, because the ideas, once Pandora's box is opened when it comes to really solving some of the big questions that your organization is trying to solve, Pandora's box opens, and a lot of people who were desiring those stages of that tribal leadership flock to you. And so a lot of people end up coming to you for a lot of different really great ideas, but you also have to be strategic in how you take those risks, knowing that you're going to have to fail forward on some things, but you have to be strategic as to which risks you take, when and how often you take those. You're not going to take, multiple millions of dollars worth of risks in a single year, but you need to be strategic at which ones you take.
But I think the fail forward is, is a great terminology because, you could give up something that is kind of a known, that you've always done. And, it's an event or whatever, say, we've always done this, but we can't take on this new idea and do that too. So, there is a risk because you back off of that, hoping the new idea is as good as you think, and it may not be. So, the other risk to that could be the criticism that you as a leader have to accept and say, well, I thought this was going to be better. It wasn't. And in retrospect, yes, that would have been safe and we could have done that, but we chose not to. But I think that comes with that being willing to, fail forward, say, but now we know either why it didn't work or we're not going to do that again,
Right.
and that's good too, to know what, tried that, we went on the limb and it didn't work for us for whatever reason. Next question.
All right. What are some good ways to help?
Byron has input.
Oh.
Sorry, just speaking about the stage 5, I think it's important that we recognize that even the example that we had of the Olympic hockey team, the stage 5, this whole thing is so dynamic that stage 5 is really truly a combination of people, of opportunities, of time, and they don't always stay the same. None of that is static. It's always changing. So you may be in a stage 5 and you may be just cruising along and really excited, and then something happens to a person on your team, or the time changes in terms of literally something in the environment outside of your control changes. So the goal is to try to be able to accelerate and be at a stage 5, but also recognize that we are never always there, and we don't stay there. And even like that Olympic team, the time component is within a year's time, some of them actually probably got to a point where their own bodies were giving up because it was time. They could not continue to maintain that level of excellence physically. So just keep in mind that the stage 5, there's that is really a small portion. Yes, we want to get there, but we also realize that we can't stay there. It's not really sustainable. And John, you spoke to that. You get to those places where if you're at stage 5, you will have so many different opportunities coming at you. The question is, how do we choose what's best for the organization and for us as a team to move forward without literally causing total chaos? And those opportunities, while they may be really, really good, we could fall quickly if we take too much on. And so it is that fine balance of finding those things. But don't be afraid, and don't be too worried if you feel like your organization is not in stage 5 but is in stage 4, and then back up to stage 5 and then maybe to stage 4. That's okay. So I want to kind of just hopefully ease the mind of well, I get to stage 5, then what? It's okay. So sorry. Now we can take that other question.
No, and that's a good point too. And they bring that point out in the book that stage 5 is nearly impossible to maintain on a consistent basis. Mm-hmm. And then part of that is just because the opportunities change.
Yeah.
So, next question.
We're ready.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are some good ways to help an employee/colleague get from a lower performing stage to a higher one, a 4 or a 5?
Well, I would say that many times you need to signal to them in a loving way about where they are. If they don't have a cultural informant to know exactly where they are, you need to find somebody that they trust enough in would be able to signal to them where they are in their development of the stages. I think too often we ignore those tribes that are in those stage 1 because we think it's just going to go away, or we think that we can overwhelm them with all of the other tribes that are in your organizations that are at the 3 or 4s and 5s. And I think from our perspective, that is a fatal mistake. I think that even if it's just 2%, if it's 2% of your tribe, that's 2% too many, and you should constantly be working to signal to them that they're in that stage, and then if they accept that cultural informant and they believe that that's where they are, then I think you can begin to scaffold some ways in which you can help them get out of it if they wish to get out of it. If they don't wish to get out of it, then they need to get out of your business.
Yeah, it's not often the case that you will have you'll have a lot of people in space. Have them there is a challenge, and to the question, the idea of how do you help move people along, it's important to recognize that you still have to help take people through the stages. They can't skip stage. It's not possible from the research and these things. You can't take somebody who's a 1 and shift them to a 3 or a 2 to a 4. You literally have to help carry them through these different stages. So for example, for the person who's a stage 1, it's helping them to understand that it is possible for life to be good. And sometimes that's a challenge of a mindset that you need to kind of help move them through that. And whether it's you or a person in your organization, but it's recognizing that it's kind of moving to, it's not just that life sucks, it is possible for life to be good. There are some things that are, and to practice identifying what those good things are. If you have somebody in a stage 2, then how do you move them to a stage 3? Maybe that's bringing them along, help them connect with a friend or a mentor, somebody who is further along, and maybe in a stage 3, with focus on their strengths, focus on how they are making a positive impact in the organization, helping them to realize that what they are doing really is contributing to something bigger and that they are important. So it's work, because a stage 2 person is usually very disconnected and disengaged. And so it's important to help them connect and engage with the organization. It's helping them find ways to see that what they're doing is making a positive impact in the organization. So, I mean, from there, then with stage 3, it's then helping them to, that stage 3 to stage 4 is where that epiphany happens. That piece that what John was mentioning earlier, that's a huge aspect of, that's the epiphany moment. That's the moment where it's turned from being internal and inward focused or self-centered to being others focused and looking out to the organization and to the team. That's the huge light bulb boom kind of a moment. And then it's beginning to speak to that from a literal language change. Have you had moments where you've been able to connect somebody who you recognize as valuable to the company? You don't want to, or your organization, you don't want to leave them where they are. You don't want to let them go because they are valuable. So what are some, I have that idea of having a mentor, or are there other ways that you can help encourage them kind of in their progress to becoming more of stage 3 and into stage 4?
I think one of the things, just to speak to that, and it's very difficult to not get into where you're evaluating and getting back to talking like a stage 3 person, basically saying I'm positive and you're not, so it has to be where it's more of a statement of fact as opposed to an evaluation of, So I think that's important in this, and I think that goes back to some of the concepts in the book as far as to get that person to the next stage. You're right; they have to kind of have their own epiphany, and you can't just make that happen, but you have to kind of talk them through it. And I would ask you a question back with that, Byron, is as people work through the different stages, as opposed to saying to them, your attitude is terrible, because you're looking at them as a stage 1 or stage 2, saying, this is where the organization is. This is where most of the people are, and, it becomes more of a conversation of, we want you to be more on board with where we are, so it's a more comfortable position for you. Because, you are a valuable employee. You have to start somewhere. I think you're right with giving them some basis to go on. Not like, everything about you sucks, but, let's start with the positives, and let's see what some of the challenges are with, how you're maybe impacting the rest of the tribe in a negative way because you're not necessarily viewing the world the way they are. But, and even with that, I'm making evaluative statements, and I'm trying not to, but I think it's very difficult. So, that's one of the things that I would say I struggle with is, how do you get that person to understand that there needs to be a shift, and be totally positive and supportive, but at the same time, and John said it pretty, abruptly, there may come a point where they no longer fit, and if they do not want to, elevate their stage, and they have no desire to do that, and they're actually dragging down the whole tribe, they have to understand also at some point, you're going to cut them loose, so that's not exactly a positive ending for them. So how do you manage that based upon, the discussion we're having? Yes, Ashley.
If I could give just
John, do you have a?
Well, hold on. Ashley has a comment here.
I just to feedback that I've been in this situation before as a manager, and I think the way to kind of take it back from criticism is thinking in that moment it's about doing the best for them. I know stage 1 and 2, people are miserable. Nobody wants to live their life like that.
Right.
I mean, they're not healthy. They're not enjoying life. And so I think seeing it instead of from the perspective of coaching up or coaching out, rather than I'm doing them a favor,
right,
because maybe they just don't see there are possibilities for them to be happy, either here or elsewhere.
Right.
Yeah, so a couple of things that we've done that were purposeful is that we've had staff share their why, share their personal story, so that you can gain some insight, just as you said, as to how they ended up building up this persona that fits them into one of these categories. And I think that it develops empathy. I think because, many times the people that are in the stage 1 or 2 are unbelievably frustrated. Mm-hmm. And so learning about their story, about who they are, and really these stories become very powerful stories that they share publicly with their colleagues about, in some airing their frustrations about their life or airing their frustrations about their work. But what we provide for them is, again, back to, we provide them a safe place where they can share it. And then if they can begin to share it, it begins to give you some strategies for how you can pour into them about helping them see that there is a better way. I would say the other thing is to be purposeful in how you celebrate the good things that people do. Too often we see the outcome, we move on to the next thing, and we really don't pause enough to say a thank you, a collective, purposeful, what a fantastic job the team did in making this work. Even when it's something that you took a risk on and it wasn't successful, you still want to go through the process about, let's celebrate what we learned. Yes, it didn't produce necessarily the outcome, but let's celebrate the learning that occurred out of that. And I want to mention about the strategic planning portion. Too often, if you get to a stage 4 or 5, you get to a 5, you want to build a system that's more like a ladder to say, okay, well, these are the 8 things we did to make that work. Well, too many dynamics change. Our strategic planning is more of a jungle gym. It is more of, okay, well, this is where we're going now, but the way in which we get there 6 months from now may be very, very different because the dynamics change, people change, environments change, conditions change in the business environment. You need to understand that that's the end goal, but the way in which you get there may be a different pattern. It may be a jungle gym.
Yeah, I mean, the segue here is really awesome because we're kind of talking about that whole piece of the stage 4, and you're right. Everything changes. So one of the pieces that I think is important is recognizing that even when we are in that position to try to help someone move up in the stage from, let's say it's stage 2 to stage 3, that the notion that we keep pointing back to the goals of the organization. It's important to help. One, there's that networking triad and helping people to realize that they're not just the only ones who are a part of the like they're not the holder of all the knowledge, that you've got a network. The next piece is recognizing that core values really are an important part of this process. And, whether it's identifying what those core values are in a way that every organization is different. Every organization has a different set of core values. I love that Butler Tech has that concept of speaking the truth. And yet there are other organizations where that may not necessarily be one of their core values. But when you begin to, and the whole point is, you begin to have people who are in alignment with your core values. It's not about agreement, it's about alignment. And so if you help move them to be in alignment with your core values, and you keep speaking about the core values, that's what actually becomes the decision maker for whether or not they are going to stay with the organization. Because then, that's the point where you're going, okay, these are the things that are most important to the organization. And do you see alignment, or how can you become better aligned? What kind of things can you do in your environment, in your workplace? This could be a conversation with an employee. What do you need to do, or who do you need to become to be in alignment, if that's your choice? It's still a choice of the individual, but it's to try to help them think through and realize that you are a valuable part of the process. And then the next step beyond the core values. So the core values is what we as an organization claim as our foundation. The next piece is to proclaim a noble cause. And Dan, you spoke to that. That was where that organization said, our competition is not another pharmaceutical company. Our competition is cancer. That's the noble cause. That's the thing that pushes people to begin fighting for what they can do as a team, because they know they can't do it alone. And so it's the combination of those things of having the network and the triads, having core values, and having that noble cause that's aspirational, that pushes people, that encourages and fosters a sense that everybody has to be on board. And those are some of the pieces I think that you can begin to kind of think through. Hopefully that kind of helps maybe answer that question a little bit. But this is part of the challenge, is how do we do this in a way that we can begin to foster and help move people up in the stages. The idea is that it's not about us, right? It's not about me as the leader. It's about what we have created and encapsulated in these core values, in this goal and push for a noble cause. and things that we will be pushing for and seeking to obtain, and just in the work that you both are doing from the Chamber, from Butler Tech, you truly have those kind of aspirational goals that are truly, it's amazing that the things that you've been able to accomplish because of the drive in that direction. And so that's, but those are, it's still challenging to have individuals within the organization, or maybe even an entire tribe within the organization. Keep in mind that a tribe can be, 20 to 100 or 120 people, and you may have 3 or 4 or multiples of tribes within your organization. So keep in mind that you may have certain tribes that are not even at the same stage. Other challenges. So are there other questions?
Any other questions? Yes, we have one here in the audience.
I'm wondering why the lower limit of 20 is kind of defined as, where you have to have that number to be a tribe, so to speak.
You want to address that, Ivan? Did you hear the question? Why the number of 20 is the entry point for a tribe?
Yeah, no, I think it's more just the idea that, they were talking from their business perspective, kind of you could have a smaller group, 10 or 15, but that's really, the idea is that when you get to having a tribe, it is truly, you could think of it in a team construct. And so the notion is you need to have enough people where you have a critical mass to be able to move something forward together. And so, whether it's 10 or 15 or 20, it's that idea that you've got a critical number of people who can really help make a difference.
I consider our organization a tribe, and we don't have 20 people. So, we're a mighty tribe of 6, but, so, and I feel that we are influential, but we also have a lot of assistance, from our members and our board. So our tribe grows immediately to other tribes, very, very quickly that we're connected to. Other questions?
It's.
Go ahead. No other questions, Byron.
Okay. Well, I was just to say that just kind of speaks to that notion of that even if we are a solopreneur, the sense that we really work in community and we are successful in community, whether it's a networking group, a power team of 2 or 3 or 4 other people that you work together, or what is it, an H7 or a BNI, or there's all kinds of networking groups. The chamber has a networking, lunches. Those opportunities where you can meet with people, that becomes a part of your tribe, and recognizing that you have that team that really can help propel your organization forward.
So we have about 10 more minutes, Byron. So we're in the last 10 minutes of our session here.
Okay, so let me throw up. I love these Venn diagrams, so I'm going to throw up a Venn diagram for you. And this is a piece where it kind of asks a couple of these questions where you can begin to think about. Here we are, about the tribal strategies. It'll take just a second. But at this point, the Venn diagram is a combination of the outcomes of your organization. And that's a question of what do we want? Then you have the assets, taking some time to think about, okay, what do we actually have as an organization? And then the question of what will we do? What are our behaviors? All of these come together at the nexus of our behaviors, of our outcomes, the goals, the assets. That's where we find our core values and our noble cause. If you find yourself wondering, okay, I've been hearing about core values, today, I'm even hearing about this noble cause. How do I find that? This is an exercise that you can take some time. Ask yourself these questions. Ask your leadership these questions. You know, what do we want? What kind of outcomes do we want? What do we have? And what will we do? What are the behaviors that are acceptable to help move the organization forward? And at the nexus of these things, when you begin to put these things together, you begin to dig in and you'll find what is most important to help you with your outcomes, with the assets that you have. So it's finding that center point between those three. So here's some questions to consider at the end when you're thinking about your team. You know, what stage is your team currently operating at? You know, and most will guess they're probably at a stage 2 or higher. I don't know that there are very many organizations that are successfully operating at a stage 1. So it's a fair assumption it's going to be at least a stage 2. You know, can you identify your team's core values? That may be a place where you need to start. Can you identify your team's noble cause? Those are both places that you want to consider spending some time and investing some time there. And really, back to the idea of what is the dominant language? Is it based on me or I, or is it a we and us? So just as we're wrapping up, a couple things I want to make sure we kind of have covered here. But take some time to think from your own perspective, your own background, if you've ever been a part of a stage 4 or a stage 5 tribe, and what made it different. Those are, that's a piece of, take some time to reflect on that. With your stage 3 cultures, that stage 3 culture many times will create stage 2 employees. So it's important to keep in mind that if you're at a stage 3, you want to get to a stage 4, and you want to help move your employees and help them grow and help them move forward. Your performance is about building the organization that has complete buy-in and engagement. Moving the whole thing forward is key. And getting to this idea of getting to a stage 4 is really, really critical. So as we're wrapping up, I'm curious about your light bulb moments. What kind of insights are you taking away from today? What kind of things are went to the wrong screen. What kind of things do you have that you're taking away from here? Take a few minutes and write down a couple of the insights, light bulb moments. Identify an action step. What can you do this week? What is it that you need to do this week to move your organization forward? You may have found just through the discussion, you may have realized this is kind of my epiphany moment. And so what is it that you need to move your organization forward? And I would love to hear. Would love to hear from you. Please feel free to send me an email. The email is listed with the PowerPoint presentation, or you can call. But if you're willing to do that in the next few hours, send me your information. Send me your light bulb moments. Send me your action step. What is it that you want to do in the next week? Then I would be more than happy to sit and have a conversation with you. And we'll go through a quick, we'll hop on a call and have a quick conference and discuss what it is that you would like to do and the action steps that you need to have to move forward. As we're wrapping up, any final comments, John or Dan? Just in terms of your thoughts, we really appreciate your insights and input today.
Just an encouragement that if you've had that epiphany, that you do take action, because if you don't, you can regress back into one of those stages that you had that epiphany moment that you want to transform your organization or transform yourself, depending upon where you are. But I would say that you need to be very thoughtful about taking a tangible, actionable item and working to try to get to the next phase. Too often we admire the problem, and if you have that epiphany, that's your catalyst to say, okay, I've admired it long enough. Now I'm going to do this, and whatever that is, find those people that will support you in your efforts when you fail, because you need to fail forward, and keep working to try to make it happen.
And start with language. Start with your daily language. I think that's the words you use begin to change how you think. And if you're just very mindful of taking out the I and the me and making it more of a we and a tribal, all-inclusive conversation, I think that will steer your mind in the direction you want to go. With that being said, I want to thank you, John, for joining us today. Byron, thank you. Our next conversation is going to be on July 30th. And same time, but on July 30th, so it's a week later than we have been doing it. And we thank you all for joining us. I also we have some people in the audience today, and we have a lot of people that are not physically present here. The links that we send out are shareable links. So if you've enjoyed the conversation today, the next link that goes out, make sure you share it with your team members, your clients, and join us with the next conversation, which is going to be on July 30th. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.